Hi, I'm Ryan Knowles. This is Caleb DeWiggins. He's a fellow brewer, came to help me out today. Today we're doing an all-grain beer, all-grain brewing. It's a lot different than extract brewing, which we did last time. The main difference is instead of the jug of malt syrup, we are going to be using the barley, the actual grain of the barley. And that has several benefits to using the syrup. The main one is that you will actually get a color of a beer like what you would buy in a store. You can get a much lighter colored beer. Whereas all grain, the beer will typically turn out a little bit darker than what you would expect. The type of beer that we are brewing today is a pre-prohibition lager. It's a lager that people drank before 1919 in the United States, before Prohibition. And what we'd expect, I don't really know what to expect from this beer. This isn't a type of beer that I normally would make, but it uses about 8 pounds of grain, 7.5 pounds of 6-row U.S. Barley, 1/2 pound of carapils, and 1 pound of flaked maize or corn. The corn will definitely make the beer much lighter in flavor and body, and so that's the style we're making. We will be using 2 ounces of hops. We'll be using pellet hops. The pellet hops, we'll be using boiling 1.5 ounces of pellet hops for 1 hour, and then 1/2 ounce of pellet hops for 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Yeah, 10 minutes. Okay.
I like to think that this brew is actually a lot what Adolf Budweiser would have had originally before Prohibition, or Coors brothers would have actually been drinking before Prohibition as well. It's going to be a lot hoppier. It's going to be not as light as your Budweisers or your Coorses, and it's definitely going to be a little higher in alcohol content.
Which is always nice.
Yes.
So this would be the type of beer that that people would have drank before the government handed brewing over to gangsters, is the way I look at it. So, but the main difference we're going to talk about between all grain and extract brewing. All grain, you have to extract the sugars from the barley. Okay. Right now there are very, very few sugars in the barley. There are starches. So it will undergo a process that will convert those starches into sugar. So what you have to have in order to do that, you have to have what's called a mash tun. And this is a 7-gallon Rubbermaid water cooler that I've converted into a mash tun. I've taken the spigot out of it, and then I have bought these things that you can put into it. This is the back of a toilet supply line that I just cut and took the plastic tubing out of, and then put on there with the little plastic, what do you call these things?
Fittings, ferrules.
Okay. And you just put that on both sides, then you have a valve, you can open and close it, and then and that's how you'll put the grain actually in here. Then you'll let it sit with water. We'll talk more about that later. During that time, it will convert the starches into sugars. After you get done with the first thing of that, you'll drain it into our pot, which we'll show later, and then we'll add more water to make sure we get all the rest of the sugars as much as we can out. Typically you use 1.25 quarts of water per pound of grain. So we're using 9 pounds of grain, including the corn. So it's a little under 3 gallons of water is how much water we'll use for the first sparge, for the strike. And then we'll drain all that out. The grains will absorb about half of that water. And then we will add, for the second, for the sparge, after we drain it out, we'll add 2 quarts of water per pound of grain, which is about 4.5 gallons. which is 4.5 gallons. And then that will be the rest of our beer, and almost all of that water will drain out, and that will have all the sugars on it. We should end up with about 6 to 6.5 gallons of unfermented beer, which will boil down to about 5 gallons after everything's done. And then after you get done with that point, then everything is pretty much the same. So the type of yeast we're doing, we are using a lager yeast. The main difference between a lager and an ale is the fermentation temperatures. Ales ferment at a much warmer temperature, typically around room temperature, whereas lagers you want a much cooler temperature. We are doing a lager today. We're using dry yeast. Remember I said in the first one you can use liquid yeast, you can use dry yeast. Some people like one better than the other, but they both make very, very good beer. This is a yeast starter that Caleb made.
Basically all it is a pack of dry yeast that we rehydrated. I think we'll be showing that later. It has barley extract in it, wheat extract to be exact, and then it's sat for 2 days and fermented, creating more and more yeast. If you look at the bottom there, you can see there's a small amount of cake that's left over. That's living yeast and dead yeast that'll be ready to be put in our wort once we've got our boil done.
And the main benefit of a yeast starter is that you have a large amount of very, very healthy yeast ready to go right when you pitch it. When you just sprinkle it on like I did in the first show, a lot of those yeast will die. They won't rehydrate in the beer, and they won't do as well. But it can produce a potentially much better beer with a yeast starter.
And it really doesn't take too long to really put it together. It took me about an hour.
Yeah, it's pretty easy.
And this was my first time to make a starter. So it doesn't take any time at all.
Right now we are going to heat our strike water up. For our grains, we're going to heat it up to about 175 degrees. Our point we want to get is 153. So we'll lose some of the heat from the water when we dump it in, when it mixes with the grains and everything. So you try to predict how much you're going to lose. It's always easier to go a little higher. If I end up with 160 degrees, I can always add a little bit of cool water to bring it down, and I don't have to boil more water to bring it up. So I'm going for 175 degrees. We're going to heat that up, and then I'll show you what to do with that. So a great thing about making beer is you can also make wine with pretty much the same setup. You don't need a whole lot of other things. So I branched off to that about 6 months ago, started experimenting. This one I bottled in December 19th. This is a sparkling dry mead. Mead is a honey wine, and this didn't turn out real well. It's very, very dry, kind of bitter, but it's all right. The next one I tried, I bought a wine expert kit from MidwestSupplies.com. This is a Pinot Grigio. I put a picture on here of some Capoeira fighters. I came up with the name, or my family came up with the name Roaming Rhino because I've traveled, been to a few places, and so I decided to make the wine labels fit with some places that I've traveled to. So that's why I did the Capoeira fighters. This Capoeira is a Brazilian style of martial arts that I tried to do for about 4 months when I was in Brazil. The next one I tried is I called it Rhino Red. It's a Cabernet Sauvignon. I bought also from Wine Expert. It's a red wine. It's very kind of rich flavor, very dry. I got kind of the idea to do this one when I was in Argentina, and I toured and kind of traveled around the Mendoza area, the winemaking area of Argentina, and they had made Cabernet Sauvignons as well as the Malbecs. Very, very good. So I decided to try this, and it turned out extremely, extremely good. Next thing, I kind of like to just kind of try, make concoctions, just kind of see what I get. This one I made, I call it Econo Concord. I made out of Welch's grape juice, which is just Concord grape juice. So if you ever had a Concord wine, it's, relatively the same thing. So I made that, and I actually haven't popped a bottle of that yet, so I don't know how it's going to be. I bottled it in April. I figured the longer I let it sit, it'll probably be better.